Star Trek reversing Spock's death could have been a disaster, but it was actually genius. When Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan hit theaters in 1982, the film ended with one of the most shocking moments in sci-fi cinema. Spock's self-sacrifice to save the Enterprise and his friends. Leonard Nimoy's beloved Vulcan died in a blaze of logic and heroism, and for many fans, it was a fitting, if heartbreaking, conclusion to his arc. Yet just 2 years later, Star Trek III, the search for Spock reversed that seemingly definitive death. On paper, resurrecting a character whose farewell had resonated so deeply with audiences looked like an obvious mistake. A surefire way to cheapen the emotional weight of Wrath of Khan. Instead, it became one of the smartest creative moves the franchise ever made. The high stakes of Spock's sacrifice. Spock's death worked because it felt real. It wasn't just a dramatic beat. It was a culmination of everything the character represented. For nearly 2 decades, he'd been the embodiment of duty over self, logic over ego. Watching him calmly sacrifice himself to save the ship sealed his legend. Audiences wept. Critics praised Nimoy's performance. And for Paramount, the death gave Star Trek a jolt of mainstream relevance it hadn't had since the original series. At the time, killing Spock wasn't merely bold. It was risky. The franchise's fan base was famously passionate, and any misstep risked backlash. Nimoy himself had reportedly asked for the death scene to give his character a dignified exit. That meant, at least in theory, Spock was gone for good. The peril of resurrection. Resurrecting a character after such a definitive death is a notorious storytelling pitfall. It risks eroding trust between creators and their audience. If death isn't permanent, then sacrifice loses its meaning. In the early 1980s, before comic book movies normalized endless character revivals, bringing Spock back could have come across as pandering, even cynical. It's easy to imagine the disaster scenario. The search for Spock opens with some contrived, hand-wavy explanation. Spock reappears alive and well, and the audience rolls its eyes. Instead of feeling elated, fans feel cheated, and one of the greatest science fiction deaths is tarnished. That was the tightrope the filmmakers had to walk. Why it worked. So why did the search for Spock succeed where so many other resurrections fail? First, it wasn't treated as a cheap twist. The entire film is structured around the moral, emotional, and spiritual consequences of Spock's death. Kirk and the crew pay an enormous price to bring him back. The destruction of the Enterprise, exile from Starfleet, and the death of Kirk's son David. The stakes stay high. Nothing about this process is easy, and no one escapes unscathed. Second, the movie reframes the resurrection as a continuation of Spock's sacrifice rather than its negation. His Katra, his living spirit, is preserved within McCoy, a concept drawn from Vulcan mysticism established earlier in the franchise. By planting that seed in Wrath of Khan, the writers gave themselves a logical and emotional pathway for Spock's return. This wasn't a sudden retcon. It was a narrative fuse they'd already lit. Third, Nimoy's involvement mattered. After initially wanting to leave the role, he became intrigued by directing. Paramount offered him the chance to helm the search for Spock, giving him creative control over his character's rebirth. As a result, the film honors both the actors and the characters' journeys. Spock's return feels earned because Nimoy himself is guiding the process. A resurrection that deepens the story. Instead of cheapening Spock's death, the search for Spock adds layers to it. The crew's willingness to break Starfleet law mirrors Spock's original act of selflessness. Just as he gave up his life to save them, they give up their careers and their ship to save him. It's a rare case where a resurrection strengthens the themes rather than undermines them. Even Spock's eventual recovery is handled with restraint. When he's reborn in body, his mind is fragmented. He must undergo a ritual to restore his memories. This creates a liminal period where Spock is present, but not entirely himself. A powerful metaphor for rebirth and identity. It gives Nimoy space to explore new dimensions of the character, which he continued to do through Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home and beyond. The ripple effect across the franchise. Spock's resurrection also shaped Star Trek's future. It paved the way for stories that explored the spiritual and metaphysical side of the universe, from Vulcan mysticism to the nexus of generations. It allowed Nimoy to guide the series through its most successful period, culminating in The Voyage Home, still the highest-grossing original cast film. Without Spock, the franchise might have stalled out or lost its heart, and it provided a blueprint for how Star Trek can handle monumental character shifts without betraying its core. Later shows like Deep Space Nine and Discovery would also take bold risks with death and resurrection arcs. None of them hit quite the same balance as The Search,